Hi, I'm Kirk Botula. I'm the CEO of the CMMI Institute. And as David has said, the CMMI Institute became independent of the Software Engineering Institute in 2012. And just a personal comment by way of my background, I'm not I have no military experience, no government experience. I have no experience with the Department of Defense. I'm a commercial product guy. My undergraduate studies were in fine arts, and I went to school at Carnegie Mellon University as a wee lad, and worked in the Robotics Institute as a research assistant while I was studying fine arts. So it's I'm very, very, very passionate about disciplined innovation, and today I'm going to talk a little bit about my personal experience with the CMMI, some surprising things I've learned about the CMMI since I got involved with it, and I'm going to talk a little bit about, I'm going to give a couple of practical takeaways, sort of an enterprise hack and a personal life hack, and I'm going to talk about courage and love. So the mission of the CMMI Institute is to make the world work better. And we mean that, of course, literally because we work with the domain of work. I have a confession to make. Please keep this amongst ourselves. The CMMI Institute does have a software development team, and they use Kanban to manage their work. Yeah. And I would say this is evidence. We're very, very passionate about best practices. I've always been passionate about best practices. And in a past life, I was president of an enterprise, commercial enterprise software company in the financial technology space. And we were always trying to find a competitive advantage. And we were doing contextual research on our products. We were using new methods, anything that worked, and we were really empirically based. We'd pilot new things and measure them and try again, but in spite of all of our effort, we had 40% rework rates. And one day our chief architect came into me and he said, "Kirk, we need more guys." I said, "Chris, we've got 40% rework rates." He said, "But we need more guys." And I said, "Well, with 40% rework rates, that's kind of like we're asking everyone to come in the morning and work till 2 in the afternoon and then say, 'All right, everyone, let's start over.' Or everyone comes in on January 1 and works through the end of July and say, 'That was so much fun doing all that work. Let's do the same work again until the end of the year.'" Right? That's really what rework is, right? So I said, what if instead we created an environment where people's effort bore more fruit? Right? So the time when you show up, the effort that you invest produces a greater yield. And around this time, I found out, I had heard about the CMMI, and I asked the head of our project management office, I said, "Pam, what's the CMMI and why should I care?" And she came in with this 750-page book and she put it on my desk. And I said, "Well, that's the first problem," right? So that was no good. For some reason, I persisted in trying to figure it out. And I eventually got this sense of sort of the difference between capability models, between standards, between methods. And I simplified it in my layman's terms to this, that the model was dealing with what, and methods were dealing with how. That was my kind of just guy on the street view of it. And I apologize to all of you who know better, but that was how I look at it. And so, for example, the CMMI would deal with the what of project and work management. And it would say things like, hey, in project and work management, you need to have your stakeholders engaged. It doesn't tell you how. It just says it's almost like a requirement, like in software, sort of in the problem space as opposed to the solution space. I'll say in the problem space, we need a way to engage our stakeholders. The solution space is the how you do it. So the how might be, in project and work management, it might be Kanban, it might be Scrum, it might be drum buffer rope, It might be spiral. And I began to look at the CMMI as sort of like a GPS that could show me the map, help me align myself to my goal, and help me know where I am in relation to that and help me get there. It allowed me to kind of prioritize opportunities to create value and mitigate risk in my organization. Now, I didn't know any better, all right? Those of you who may be more, who are more deeply experienced in this community, I had no idea. People said to me, oh no, Kirk, you can't do that. It creates all kinds of red tape. Or, no, Kirk, you can't do this. It's only for big organizations, not for startups or venture-backed companies. And oh no, Kirk, you won't want to do this. It creates reams and reams of non-value creating documentation. Right? So I didn't know the people who could tell me these things, so none of these things happened. So since I had no expectation of these outcomes, things went terrifically well. And we deployed it in our environment, and it wound up reducing our customer-facing defects 75%, which was awesome. Created increased our capacity. And then when I came to the Institute, I found out that wasn't uncommon, that there are organizations all over the world getting material results. Like GM improved their on-time delivery from 50% to 95% of milestones met. Or Intel reduced verification and validation from 50 hours to 3 hours. Or Siemens improved productivity 25%. Or Raytheon reduced rework 42%. Now, in spite of this, I also learned that people viewed the CMMI kind of like this old retro technology. It was like awesome in its day, but isn't really relevant anymore, right? Like 8-track tapes, you know, and some people might do it as kind of like an affectation, you know, I want to see my 8-track tape collection. I have, in spite of the fact, the surprising thing that I learned is actually the adoption of CMMI is increasing rapidly. It grew 16% just last year. I also heard, oh no, the CMMI is just for the defense industry, right? It's part of the military-industrial complex and all that kind of thing. It's not for businesses. And the surprising thing I discovered was that over the past few years, the leading sectors have been telecommunications, data storage, security, recovery, finance, banking, and insurance, right? And then I also heard, as I said, it's just for giant corporations. And the surprising thing that I learned was that 30% of appraisals are done in organizational units of fewer than 26 people, and 80% are in organizational units of less than 100. Right? The other thing I heard was, no. CMMI is actually a prescriptive waterfall method of doing projects. It was invented in an industrial factory in the 30s. And that it can't be used with Agile principles, approaches, or methods. That they don't work together. And in spite of the fact, the surprising thing I learned is that the use of Agile methods in appraised organizations has been on the rise. We can only measure back to 2009, but last year it was close to 80% of organizations appraised are using Agile methods. And these organizations are getting the same kind of material results, like Nationwide in their Agile transformation effort using the CMMI at maturity level 3, were able to reduce defects per release from 8 to 1 and improve their delivery commitments from 60% to 90%. Capgemini improved time to market 25% and decreased total cost of quality 25%. Minax improved sprint commitments 30%. So you see the same sorts of impacts. Now, I asked myself, so why is there this misunderstanding? I said, well, part of it is our fault. I mean, when I told you the story of getting this 750-page book, right? Well, the 750-page book, we had it tested by experts, and it turns out it's written at a postdoctoral level. Like, you need a PhD to read the CMMI. And yet, I can tell you, to be honest, all that is in the CMMI are things like exercise, eat right, get enough sleep. There's nothing in there. There's no calculus, there's no physics, there's nothing that requires a PhD. Right? So we've kind of, I think we've made it harder and less accessible for something that's actually an aggregation of best practices, just relentless common sense. We've kind of, we've made the UI difficult. So we're working on that. Another thing that I think has happened is in the US in particular, because of its history, there were periods of time where the government had said, hey, this is a way where that we can identify trusted suppliers, and began to require maturity levels in order to bid on work. And that drove a shift from kind of an improvement-based perspective to a compliance-based perspective, right? And the minute you start doing things because you have to, you get all sorts of behaviors and outcomes that are different than if you're doing something because you think it's going to create value and it's good for you. And I can, from my own personal experience, when I was running a commercial software shop in the financial space, we had clients that wanted us to do security audits. And at the time, I said to the person in charge of it, I said, look at this thing. If there's anything that could create value for us, sure. Right? But otherwise, do the least amount possible and don't let it disrupt our business. Right? That's how people think about compliance things. It's like, oh, the government is telling me I need to do this thing. So that's, I think, in the US, we saw sort of a culture of compliance emerge that undermines results. Then you also saw, because of that, you saw people taking a belt and suspenders kind of approach, sort of over-engineering their solutions, whereas the CMMI never asked for people to do things that aren't aligned with their goals or create value. People, because their business was at stake in terms of achieving maturity levels, they began to take risk-mitigating behaviors that weren't mitigating risk against their business outcomes. The business outcome was they wanted to get their maturity level, right? So they started kind of over-papering the approach rather than using it as a map to improve their business. And then lastly, I think, is experiential. This is a photograph of a dinner from Long John Silver's. That's the one on the left. And I say, if you hear, like, if all you've eaten is at Long John Silver's, then and someone says, like, oh, yeah, well, Long John Silver's uses a CMMI. And that's your experience. You're going to associate your experience. You can say, oh, that's what that is. So if I worked in a bureaucratic waterfall environment that was compliance-driven, and I hear that people are using CMMI, I say, oh, that's what that brings to the table. And so consequently, I'll associate my experience with that. I won't know that there's delicious and delightful presentations like the picture on the right. It'll just be outside my experience. And lastly, I think it's actually really, really hard to create athletic cultures, which is ultimately what the CMMI is doing, is creating cultures that function at the intersection of discipline and imagination. And it's hard to find teams that say, you know what, I get up in the morning and I want to do better. I get up in the morning and I want to work with my team. You know what, measure me. Keep track of what I'm doing. I'm going to try this out and see if we get a better result. Right? And together we have a shared goal and we're going to win. Right? And we're going to call one another on. We're going to raise the bar. We're going to be transparent. We're going to keep score. And we're going to keep improving. And we're going to kick our competitors' ass. And so that's sort of the characteristics of an athletic culture. And to create that culture, you need both imagination and discipline. And if you just have imagination, there are lots of people that say, hey, I want to be free to be you and me. I want to do what I want when I feel like it. I don't want to be accountable. I just want to do my creative thing. And then there are the disciplined people that say, I want to check the box. I just want to check the box that life is in order, it's structured, it's reliable, it's consistent. And with either of these on their own, we don't get very far. But every work of human merit, I would argue personally, lies at the intersection of discipline and imagination. Whether you're looking at a cathedral, or you're looking at Cirque du Soleil, or you're looking at the Navy SEALs, or you're looking at a NASCAR pit crew, excellence always lies at the intersection of discipline and imagination. Now, to talk a little bit about building Agile capability, I want to talk a minute about what is capability. McKinsey defines it as anything an organization does well that drives meaningful business results. So, why CEOs care about capability? It's a top 3 priority for 50% of CEOs. And the reason is, when they go to business school, they study all the corporate strategists. Michael Porter, who's sort of the father of modern corporate strategy, defines strategy as deliberately choosing a set of different activities to deliver unique value. What you'll sometimes hear called core competence. George Stock of the Boston Consulting Group amplified this idea, saying that the essence of strategy isn't the structure of companies, products, and markets, but its behavior. The building blocks of strategy aren't products, markets, but capabilities. Right? In the past few years, as we've heard about business model innovation, every organization that's been able to successfully pivot is pivoting on its capabilities. Right? In point of fact, to boil down an entire MBA program, there are really only 2 winning strategies: cost leadership and differentiation. In cost leadership, I'm able to deliver the same amount of value to the marketplace for a not lower price, but a lower cost structure, and get superior returns, and therefore have more capacity and resources than my competitors. Or I'm able to provide higher value to the marketplace through differentiation at the same cost of the average competitor, and thereby have superior resources and or capacity or availability. That's it. Those are the only 2 ways to win. Everything else is just dog paddling. Right? The other dimension of why CEOs care about capability is this good profit concept. You outperform your competitors when you're doing what you're good at and the customer values it. That's it. Any other combination creates problems. In the software space, if you're selling something people want but you're not good at it, you're going to erode your margins as technical people are constantly running out there trying to fix it. If you sold something someone doesn't really need, and even though you do it well, every time there's a contract renewal, executives are going to be out there trying to give stuff away for free, saying, please, 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 you haven't deployed it enough, right? So it's really only in the space where the customer really needs it and you guys really do a great job that you can create the higher margins and the extra capacity and resources. So that's all CEOs are thinking about it. Now let's talk about that in the capacity of agility. And I know that there have been a lot of conversations yesterday about why these initiatives fail. These are just a couple of personal observations. One, people think they're going to get a high-performance vehicle. They wind up feeling like they're stuck in traffic. Capers-Jones published some data about 3 years ago where he compared a dozen software engineering methods. And I thought this was interesting. This is on the left-hand side, a spiral life cycle using CMMI at CMMI maturity level 5 against Scrum. And this isn't quite fair. This is just what I could pull out of the data because the Scrum organization wasn't appraised. But you can see that in terms of defects delivered is about 3 times higher on the Scrum side, and the high severity defects are twice as high. The 5-year total cost of ownership and cost of quality, you see a similar situation where the cost of quality is twice as high and the TCO is about 50% higher. And people would say, yeah, Kirk, but that's not why we're using Scrum. We're using Scrum to go fast and to cut our costs. It's like, okay, all right, you're valuing it on a different dimension. But it turns out, according to his research, that the initial development was only 5% faster under Scrum, and the costs were actually a little bit higher. So another dimension is when it comes time to you could either say, well, is this a story of maturity? It would be interesting. I'd love to see him do the same research with a Scrum organization at maturity level 5, because that's the thing that's not quite fair. Because you're changing 2 variables, right? You're changing the maturity variable and you're changing the method variable. But the thing that is clear is that we have this person is going through a major transformation initiative and packing extra resource demands into their business and doing that, right? In that same spirit, another source of bottlenecks is just complexity. And I heard this spoken about yesterday. This is a particular expression. This is a true story. The names have been changed and the numbers have been changed to make it simpler to tell. I had a project manager come to me once. I said, "Hey, Pam, how are we going to make this release?" She said, "Absolutely." I said, what do the odds do you give it?" She goes, 90%. I said, "Why is that?" She said, "Well, we've got 3 projects. Project 1, 90%. Project 2, 90%. Project 3, 90%. We are so 90% going to release." I said, "Oh, that would be awesome. That would be so awesome if that was how math worked, right?" But that isn't how math works, right? So independent events, the likelihood of the occurrence of a series of independent events is the intersection, right? So we say 90% cubed, not 90% averaged. It turns out there's only a 72.9% chance of hitting the release date. You say, "Hey, that's still pretty good." But that means the chance of failure isn't 10%, it's 27%. So her risk was 3 times what she thought it was, right? And in point of fact, that's just the greater the complexity, the more projects in the system, the more things coming together at a point of integration, it just goes up. So by the time you have 10 things at 90%, you've got over a 60% chance of failure, right? So this complexity creates bottlenecks. And then lastly, I know that this kind of concept everyone here is deeply familiar with. You start with your high-performance team. You put it in an environment with multiple teams. You put it in a supply chain with upstream and downstream dependencies. You have it focus on a target market rather than a single customer. You put in competitive behavior and market dynamics, and all of a sudden things are stuck, right? And the reason this happens is, and I'll invoke Ellie Goldrat's story about the robot in the goal, which is just the story of the local optimum. The idea that a team performing 30% better inside a system that isn't. A high-performance team can only produce results outside the system as at the capacity of the upstream or downstream constraints, right? So the system will only go as fast as its greatest point of constraint. And of course, in the system of a business, we've got our whole supply chain. That's why this enterprise question matters, right? So the last reason why we have these problems is that when executives say agility, they don't mean agile methods or agile values, they mean an enterprise that's responsive and resilient. They want an enterprise that can strike first, that can take a punch, and can hit back. That's what they mean. They mean agile like a boxer, right, as an enterprise. That's what they're talking about. And they don't care how you get there. They just want that, right? And so I think I saw something like 70% of agile transformations are adopting Scrum right now, something like that. So there are all these guys running around the world buying Scrum, believing it's going to make their organization boxers. And what it's going to do is give them little teams stuck in constrained systems, right? McKinsey published an interesting article last year called Agility, It Rhymes with Stability. And they argued at the enterprise level to build dynamic capability, you need tailoring, you need a disciplined way of tailoring structure, governance, and process on a stable backbone. All right? So this is the idea of having a stable backbone of structure, of governance, and process that has decisions for tailoring and flexibility built into it to provide that dynamic capability. He says if you just have the stable backbone, you wind up with a bureaucracy. If you're just responding dynamically to changing environment, you wind up kind of thrashing as a startup. But if you wind up with the backbone with kind of the dynamic links to where the work is done, you can deliver actual Agile capability. And ultimately, that's what we're looking to do at the Institute. I'll jump for a minute back to the CMMI. For folks who aren't familiar, we've got the CMMI for development, services, acquisition, which is really about procurement, the people CMM, and the DMM, which is the data management maturity model. And to translate it into English, it deals with project and work management, product engineering and development, supplier management, supporting infrastructure, process management, people management, service delivery management, and data management. Those are kinds of the work areas that we look at. And we think of it as really an alignment system to help people kind of align their system to their goals. The idea is to actually bring the organization together to drive performance at an organizational level. Okay. Now, I talked about the CMMI for a little bit. Now I want to give everyone, I'm going to give 2 practical takeaways. First, I'm going to describe something that is familiar to everyone, I am sure, but it's an enterprise hack to accelerate any organization to its optimum speed right now. It'll work in any enterprise, any system of any complexity. Simple. Number 1, prioritize the work in the system. Number 2, sequence it. Have all the resources concentrated in terms of their ability to advance the highest priority initiative, one thing at a time. Eliminate all multitasking, which is to say you're not allowed to work on project priority 4 if you can advance project priority 2. And eliminate all milestones, right? So, which also time boxing and milestones can slow down work. So eliminate those so that work advances purely in terms of the point of completion and is picked up, it's run more like a relay race, right? Using this approach, and I'll just offer 2 pieces of evidence here. Using this approach at the Institute, in 2012, the CMMI practice was at the Software Engineering Institute at Carnegie Mellon. It's represented by the blue line. One of the things we do is we review appraisals. When organizations are appraised, we review them, we look at them, we say, that looks good, maturity level 3, and hand it back. You can see on average it took 20 days to review an appraisal in 2012, and the longest point it took 105 days. There were about a dozen people working on that to support the world in processing appraisals in 2012. In 2013, we reduced our capacity to 4 people, right? And by applying that approach to work, we compressed the upper limit from 105 days to 55 days and the mean cycle time from 20 days to 8 days. Right? Another example is in a multi-project environment on software projects. And this is actual data where the same run rules were applied to project work, software development projects. And you can see here, its hours effort is up the left axis, and then the vertical axis, and the project duration is along the horizontal axis. And what you can see is essentially where projects are on the same line, like same hours effort, moving from project duration closer from the right to the left shows that the same amount of work was accomplished in a shorter time period, right? So if you see that upper green, that green project in the upper right-hand corner where it took close to a year to do, close to 4,500 hours of work, you can see that the blue dot at about 3,500 hours work was done in about 90 days, right? And so down at the lower end, you can see lots of projects of similar work. The compression of the green dots to the blue dots resulted essentially in a 3 times productivity gain. So using this, they were basically getting about 12 days worth of work done in a project day rather than 5 days in a project. So just a 3x in terms of productivity just by applying that kind of principle. Now, the problem with this, so I'd say just in sum, prioritize sequence, concentrate resources, no multitasking, no milestones. Anyone can do that, right? And this just optimizes for speed, right? Doesn't optimize for anything else. So this will just make whatever your existing system is go as fast as it can. So if you're producing pies that no one wants to eat, you'll produce pies that no one wants to eat much faster. This doesn't work in many environments because executives need to prioritize or make choices. And the role of the executive is to make decisions and allocate resources. But when confronted with a decision to trade off between, say, quality or scope or time, they will go to Freddie Mercury of Queen, who said, "I want it all, I want it all. I want it all, and I want it now." Right? And so that unwillingness to make decisions is what we call executive cowardice. Now, so I raised the issue of executive cowardice because this is relevant to the people in this room. And just to wrap up on this, I want to go to, there was this friar, this Italian friar in the 13th century named Thomas Aquinas, who loved Aristotle. Right? And one of the things that Thomas Aquinas learned from Aristotle and was about courage. And Thomas Aquinas said that courage sits at a mean between recklessness and cowardice. So courage isn't actually fearlessness. In fact, you have to have fear present for it to be courage. I mean, just imagine your own experience. When you're not afraid, it doesn't really count as being courageous, right? But when you don't want to do something, that's when courage is called for, right? And recklessness is actually doesn't recognize risks appropriately and consequently will not accomplish the good. Cowardice, of course, flees in the face of danger and also won't accomplish the good. So you require courage to achieve the good. Think of it as like an accelerator. You don't want to go, you hit the gas anyway and you go. You do what you don't want to do in order to accomplish the good. Now, he also has some things to say about love. And this is surprising. He says love is not a feeling. In spite of movies, in spite of music, in spite of flowers and roses, it turns out, according to this guy, love is not a feeling. He says love is a commitment of the will to the good of the other. Right? So if he's right, that means you can actually love people you don't even like. Right? So you can, because what it really is being committed to their best interests and doing what is best for them. So this gets really unprofessional and uncomfortable. You can love your boss, you can love your team, you can love your customers, you can love your investors, you can love your community simply by actually being committed to what's best for them and taking action in that way. So we've got courage, which is doing what we don't want to do because we know that's what's necessary to accomplish the good. And we have love, which is really just committing to their welfare. Now here's the other hack. So we had the enterprise hack, here's the personal life hack. Aristotle and Aquinas said these things, these classical virtues were habits. They were habitual. You could cultivate a predisposition through repeated practice. So you don't have to be born courageous. You're not naturally courageous. You're not naturally loving. You cultivate that as a habitual disposition. So what everyone can do is make a habit of courage simply by getting out of your comfort zone for the good of your teams and the good of your organizations, for the good of your families, for the good of the people you care about. So it's explicitly that you need to care more about the people you work with than you care about your comfort zone. Right? And that, we all know that work is not the way it's supposed to be. Right? Life is not the way it's supposed to be. But the kind of people that are at this conference are already committed to making things the way they ought to be. People come to me and say, yeah, but Kirk, I'm not the boss. I'm powerless. But what we see is through the habituation of getting out of your comfort zone, through the habituation of taking action for the welfare of others, you cultivate courage. And I have to quote William Wallace as portrayed by Mel Gibson in the movie Braveheart. He says, "Men don't follow titles, they follow courage." So that's what leadership looks like, right? And that's what this community is doing. You're leading in the communities that you work with. So it's these kinds of people of love and courage, who will make the world work better. So my hope is at the conference here that you're getting lots of new ideas, lots of good thinking, planting seeds of innovation, forming new friendships and new relationships, and that ultimately they will take root and provide flourishing for the people and the organizations that you care about. So with that, thanks for your time, and thanks for your attention, and look forward to the rest of the day.